This conversation originally premiered at CFF on Tuesday, March 19th, 2024 to a live theater audience. The process of collaborating with a composer can be such a mystery. We'll let this panel conversation be your guide. Join these talented composers and filmmakers who explore the art and business of music composition to make your film truly sing. Cheers, Fraser Collins, Shervin Kermani, and moderator Richard Pierre. Welcome to the fest.
How important was music in your film?
Well, it ended up being very important, but it didn't start off that way. I kind of wanted it to be silent because it's easier to make movies that don't have music in them. And as we were working on it, as often happens, I find, at least for me, it's like I don't really know what the movie is until I'm working on the movie, and then you're on set and you're like, oh, this is what the movie is, and the last 3 days are totally wrong, and then you're trying to kind of, be true to the movie as it presents itself to you. And yeah, so the music kind of became more important as things went on, and we were kind of blocking the film, and I would kind of go back home. I would shoot like some of these blocking rehearsals to kind of see how it would move, because the whole thing happens in one location in her apartment, and so it needed to be continually interesting on a visual level. And then that experimentation in terms of the visual ended up translating into the music, which also kind of required kind of a diversity of styles and approaches to kind of match the experimentation we were doing in the visual. So all that to be said, one day Bryn's up against the wall and she's drooping down the wall as I'm trying to test this, and a balloon fell down. And I was like, oh, I like this balloon. I'm like, what if more balloons fell down? And then I went home and then I put a Mozart Lacrimosa on it, and I'm like, oh, I like that. And then, one thing leads to the other, and then suddenly the whole movie is music.
So that's actually a great answer. So basically what you're telling me is that initially you thought no music, and then all of a sudden creativity said otherwise. Absolutely. Like, you write a script and you have an idea of what it is while you're making the script, but then when you have the actor there, I don't know, at least in my experience, it's never the same as what it is on the page. The page might be perfect as it is, and then it goes on the screen, and you're like, oh, this is dead, or it doesn't work, or, I have to rethink how I'm approaching this. And then, yeah, one thing leads to another, and then, the way I thought in one way is 180-degree difference from where it ended up, kind of thing. So, yeah. And Fraser, I guess you have sort of I'm assuming the opposite experience here in terms of how you approach tweetations. But can you sort of dive into that process in terms of how important music was? And just so I just situate this is, I would say, an entirely musical short.
And because of that, music was extremely important to this film. There's no narrative. If you want to dig a little deeper, you get narrative and story through lyrics. But this is music from top to bottom. It's 6 original songs all strung together. It's a musical review. And because it is just music, we had to be really intentional with how we present this story. And I think we did that through how we structured the journey, right? We looked at musical genres and how each musical sequence contrasted the one before it or after. I think the only place where there is a narrative or dialogue is our introduction to this world. We have an invisible host who introduces this world and also gives us like a midpoint synopsis and breakdown. But other than that, yeah, it's just, top to bottom music. And I love that for this film. I don't think especially a short film, we have the luxury of, experimenting and just presenting something that's not traditional. And I'm very happy that Canadian Film Fest is presenting a film like this, because most film festivals want to show narratives and dramatic films, where our film is very not a narrative and upbeat and fun. Yeah, I mean, it really is its own film. It's really special. It is kind of hard to articulate what it is, because it doesn't really sort of fit into the typical boxes, and that's what makes it great. But tell me sort of a bit more about that process of having to write all these songs. Like, what was that like? Because I know some of them you wrote yourself, but I'm sure you brought in other collaborators, so really feel free to dive in. I hope everyone in the house is filmmakers, otherwise this might be very boring. But dive into that process. How did you go about finding those creators to work with you to bring this thing to life? Because from my eyes, there's a lot of work going on just to put together 20 plus minutes of this film. I approached the songwriting like I would script writing. And also because we are making a film, not an album, I was very mindful of story and characters and genre conventions and historical context in which the songs were created, and just conceptualizing ways to reintroduce that into our world. So yeah, I approached it as a script writer, and for the other songwriters who we brought on board, I just shared a breakdown of what this musical journey would be, and within that shared a breakdown of the character motivations, where the purpose of why we put a particular song, where it fit into the film, how it contrasted the song before it and after it. And in some cases, like 2 of the songs I wrote independently, one I wrote before the music was composed, because I just was inspired by a Jackson 5 song, and I wrote to the musicality of the song we were using as source material. I encouraged our composer to just capture that spirit so that I didn't have to adapt the lyrics much. Where another song that we composed, I wrote after the fact, but going into the music production and writing, we always knew what the story would be, who the characters were. But yeah, I'm a very visual person, so even in writing the songs, it informed a lot of the shots and the pacing and just the film we were presenting. So yeah, a few different approaches to songwriting, but yeah, I think it all came together really well.
And so I know off the top you said sort of there were multiple maybe artists that inspired you, and you just mentioned, the Jackson 5. Like, was there a specific era or like label that was like, this is all Motown, like let's really bring Motown to life in this short?
No, it wasn't specific. It was really just mostly looking at music from the 60s to today, heavily influenced by music from the 60s and 70s. Soul, R&B, Motown absolutely is an influence. But we have like very contemporary music, like inspired by, the baddies, Nicki Minaj, Megan Thee Stallion. So it's celebrating a range of black music and genres and eras. But yeah, Jackson 5 was a reference. Shirley Brown was a reference. And it's honestly, any artists from that era who have inspired music and expression every generation since is an inspiration.
Excellent. Shervin, tell me a bit more about sort of the various pieces you use in your film. Again, this is so different. You are both kind of an excellent contrast here in like one very musical short, but yours is more, a character-driven short that uses music quite creatively to add that little accent to each beat of the film. So maybe talk about like all of the little, because there's a lot of little pieces you use in order to make those, I guess, beats in the story come to life.
Yeah, it's a lot of little pieces. I can't even count them. It was but I had to break it down because while I was working on it, I realized if I tried to just like do what I normally might do, which is to improvise throughout the whole thing, it just didn't work. I needed to like break down the little pieces and be like, okay, I'm gonna take this little piece, I'm gonna try and see if I can get a couple of ideas down for this. And I ended up composing the music myself, which I don't recommend. But I also knew that like there was going to be no composer with our no budget situation. I was going to devote the amount of time that it required to actually do that because we didn't have grant funding for this particular project, and I knew that I was going to have to shoulder a lot of that burden. And even if I did work with a composer, I need to go in with like really so much research that I'm pretty much like 90% of the way there, and they're just putting finishing touches to it. But yeah, so the what I did with the music, I kind of, when I was editing it, I had all these temp tracks in there, so that I'd have like an Ennio Morricone spaghetti western track, I'd have a Nino Rota score from a Fellini film, I'd have an Astrid Gilberto song, a bossa nova song for the credits, and Penderecki horror kind of stuff that like, Stanley Kubrick used in The Shining, John Bryan score for Punch Drunk Love. So I had lots of different styles. But then, of course, I'm showing it, and as I'm editing it, because I needed all these things to kind of piece it together, and then I'm showing it to my wife, who was also a producer on this and did a million jobs, all while pregnant, by the way, which was incredible, and she actually gave birth the day after we wrapped.
That was very considerate of her.
I know. I got to thank my daughter for delaying her arrival on Earth so that we could finish shooting. But it felt haphazard. when I was cutting it or whatever. But at the same time, I knew that each style kind of spoke to the different elements of the film, and I wanted it to be kind of a roller coaster ride. So I ended up composing 90% of the music. There's like 3 tracks in there, one very, very short that's in the jump cut sequence, and then the main track that I kind of built everything around is the Mozart Lacrimosa from his Requiem. And I had this idea that I kind of stole from Beethoven, and specifically, by the way, if anybody wants to, I use a lot of classical music as references in this film, but the lecture series, How to Listen to and Understand Great Music by Robert Greenberg, is like 90% of everything I know about music in one lecture series, and I highly recommend it. It's free at the Toronto Library. I'm not involved in it in any way. I don't make any money off it, but it's an awesome resource. And specifically, when he talked about Beethoven's compositional process, I thought it was so inspiring to me because I hope this is relevant to people who are using music, is that Beethoven uses very banal themes as the building block of his music. He's not like Mozart or Tchaikovsky or Rachmaninoff that have these beautiful, lush melodies. You know, the classic kind of example that's almost a joke in musical history is the Fifth Symphony, da-da-da-dum, you know, and Robert Greenberg in those lectures says, like, you wouldn't base an entire symphony off of something that banal in his time. Haydn would have looked at that as contemporary and also another great composer and said, what are you doing? This is not what you should be basing your symphony on, right? But it's like with how he uses it, he uses the entire piece keeps referring back to this opening motif. And I had this thought, well, what if everything refers back to the Mozart Lacrimosa? Maybe that's a way to combine these various styles in a way that feels cohesive. And so, you know, there's like the melody and the ostinato, and I feel like I'm talking so much, but
keep rambling, it's okay.
So the melody in the Lacrimosa and the ostinato that starts the Lacrimosa, those 2 pieces ended up being in every single piece of the movie. So whether I'm composing something in the samba style, like the bossa nova style, or the spaghetti western style, or the Nino Rota kind of Fellini kind of style, or the Penderecki kind of horror atonal style, I'm constantly going back to this melody, which I found allowed the film to kind of go into these different styles without feeling like it was not cohesive. Because I realized in the process, because, you know, obviously I love, you know, the needle drops in Scorsese and Tarantino films and how it's like, bam, you know, you love that little needle drop. But I thought, like, well, actually the needle drops don't happen 6 times in the course of one scene, right? They actually signify a change in the Scorsese and Tarantino films. And I'm like, I have an issue where this character, we're following her in real time during this conversation, and I'm trying to do all these needle drops, and it's not working, right? So anyway, I use the Lacrimosa theme, and let's say the samba melody, you know, the Lacrimosa theme is dee da dum bum bum. So I thought, you know, if I'm doing a samba melody, it's like dee da da dum bim bum ba da dum bum bum ba da dum bim bum ba da dum bum 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 ba dum bum ba ba ba, you know, so kind of goes on. And maybe I'm embarrassing myself. And even like the Clair de Lune, the Debussy that I use, it has a similar shape to the Lacrimosa, where the Lacrimosa is dee da da dum bum, and then the Clair de Lune is dee dum bum bum bum, see dee da da dum, dee da da dum. So it's kind of identical. So I'm like, oh, okay, well, I can do a lot of different styles and still have this kind of thing, this thread that keeps it all together. And that includes the spaghetti western Morricone thing that I use as well, which also is like merging the Morricone influence with the Mozart melodic material to make something that is a different style but kind of feels still part of the same movie.
Thank you. You touched on budget, so let's talk a little bit about that, even though that's maybe boring to some people. But, like, you know, you didn't have, this was what, self-financed? Like, tell me a bit about that in terms of how that influenced your decisions in using, you know, famous, iconic tracks.
Yeah, the budget, obviously, it determines everything in terms of your approach. Because, like, you know, it's so expensive to go and say, hey, I want this Ennio Morricone piece. Good luck, right? But the classical music, you know, you can find relatively inexpensive licenses for famous classical pieces of music. And the other thing that's great about classical music, apart from the fact that it's public domain, is that you have so many options to choose from in terms of recording. Whereas, like, Astro Gilberto is just that one Astro Gilberto song, right? And it's going to cost a lot of money to get that. Whereas, you know, this is advice to anybody. If you have a classical piece of music that you really love, you might find somebody on YouTube who has done like a little chamber group or a soloist, and you can email them. And I did this. I didn't end up using actually the track that I emailed the person because it didn't end up fitting perfectly in terms of things, so I had to redo it myself. But you can email those people and say, hey, I'm, you know, assuming you're a no budget situation like I was in, and say, you know, we're doing this thing, you know, I was just wondering if you'd be willing to give us permission to use your track. We'd be happy to credit you, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, if you have a budget, then, you know, you can happily pay the people that, you know, contribute. That's wonderful. But in a situation like this, there's a lot of people who are happy to share their music, especially if it's like a rendition of a famous piece, and you can do it that way. The other thing you can do, I think, that's good about classical music is that, you know, if it's like a piano solo, for instance, you can get a MIDI file and bring it into, like, the MIDI is like the music in digital form, and then bring it into Logic. And most piano, like, there's internal libraries for piano on most DAWs, the kind of software you use for music composition, and you can kind of do it yourself too, right? And the other thing I wanted to say is the hard thing in digital music creation is, sorry, I'm taking so much time. The hard thing in digital music creation is that the melodic line is the hard thing to recreate in digital instruments, right? Like, so, you know, if you have like a sample library for violins, etc., it's like creating a lush melody just with the digital instruments. It's like, it's very hard and time consuming to make it sound real, whereas percussive elements are much more real because they're staccato. So if you use like a pizzicato score or a staccato, even with like strings, it sounds a lot more realistic. So you can, so it doesn't cost as much to create a really kind of expensive sounding score that's percussive, and even the internal instruments that are there in Logic sound great, and I used a lot of them, and they were free, you know. So I think that's something to consider as well. And that's that's not the only reason I had a lot of percussion in the film, but it's one of the reasons, and it helped also creating tension and tying together the different parts of the movie.
Are you a composer?
Sorry.
Because you seem to know a lot about this whole sound thing. I invited you to this panel because I thought you made a fun film, but I didn't realize you knew all this stuff about sound.
Well, I just thought I'd give people, you know, tips that they can use and that isn't like expensive and that can go.
Or you can just call him.
Or yeah.
Fraser, tell me a bit about your budget and how that sort of helped you bring this to life, and maybe the way you saw as close, you know, there's never enough money to make a film, but like, how did that help you realize your vision as close to what you could?
This was my debut short film, and I, for so long, just wanted to make film. And so I applied for grant funding to make a short film, something that I want to make feature films, but like no one's going to give an emerging artist, you know, a chance to do that. So I'm like, okay, this world of this musical world of birds, if I was to make that animated movie, okay, what would the Broadway version be? And so I had to, you know, scale it down and consider this live action presentation of birds. And so I applied for grant funding, and that was an amazing, I'm so proud of that application. And so we got the funding from Canada Council and Toronto Arts Council. And I don't recommend this to people, but I decided to make an ambitious film. And because I want to like make movies and like, yeah, just do incredible things and bring on incredible collaborators and make music and impact audiences. So I, you know, also went into my savings account and funded the film. And then we also had sponsors who were just in love with what we were trying to present and do. So a lot of things came together to make this film. Yeah, in terms of budget, it helped to be able to afford to create 6 original songs. And obviously we don't have like unlimited budget, so we, you know, This is a film inspired by genres and eras and music that, was able to employ orchestras to like make incredible music. I'm not saying music isn't incredible today, but what composers were doing in the 60s and 70s to make to make incredible soul music and R&B and, it just goes on, was incredible. We didn't have that luxury, and it doesn't matter. The music we created was the spirit of that sound in some of the numbers. So yeah, it helped to have some funding to make art, employ composers, songwriters, and it allowed us the opportunity to even make mistakes with compositions, right? If we had to pivot because a sound wasn't, the right direction, then, we were, having a budget allowed us to, make a few mistakes, because that would be tough to present a film where there's music involved where you're not, there's flaws. I'm happy to say you won't notice if there are flaws in the music. But yeah, try to get a budget to make art. And that's why I'm so impressed with Shervin, because he did this without grant funding, just with his own passion to learn. I don't know if your education is in music, but anyways, I'm inspired by other artists who are able to create independently. But if you, just try to get grant funding, because it's easier.
And I guess, so let's talk about some tips, and hopefully some questions are brewing. What's something maybe you would say, either it's like, music-wise, like, I would never do that again, or something you would recommend to budding filmmakers in the audience, experienced filmmakers, even like myself, who I don't know as much as you both know about music. I just put the songs on, or I get the composer to do the thing, but what are some great tips? If you are planning to use music in your film, just be really intentional with what it is that the music is trying to do. With my film, the music is the driving force. So me and the collaborators had to be really intentional with the music we were creating for that. If it is not quite the integral part of your film, but just something that elevates the production, just be really considerate in terms of what the music is for and what the audience can gain from it. And that just comes down to directing and just knowing how you want the film to be presented and received. Other advice: if you're working with composers to produce the music, this is a relationship that you're building with a collaborator. So you just want to make sure that the spirit of your project aligns with the spirit of what you're trying to present. And, don't be afraid to test them even, or, establish a relationship where you're able to be inspired by each other and, send them a text message like, hey, here's a song I just discovered, and it's the spirit in this song instrumentally, that's the spirit we're trying to capture in this film. Have a listen, what do you think? And if their response isn't inspiring, or if they're just not in line with that, then that might be telling that, that just might not be the right direction to go. Just try to align yourself with people who get what you're trying to do and say, and can also inspire you. And So I'm going to just rephrase that real quick, just for myself. So before I find a composer, I should definitely do a little bit of a relationship building / testing the waters, and maybe send them a cool track and say, this is what I'm thinking for my film. How do you interpret it on your end, kind of thing? Well, yes, especially if they're more familiar with contemporary music, just based on what you know of them. So you can just say, this is, you already know the eras and the genres we're referencing, but here's a deep cut I just discovered, and what do you think? Yeah, what do you think? This is the soul, what's being expressed in this song is the soul of what we're trying to do. And it basically just comes down to, do your collaborators have the foundation of what you're trying to present? And that might not be important for most collaborators, but in music, that's kind of important, I think. And I think especially in your film, because of, I think, the material and what you're trying to bring out, I think it is. Shervin, same sort of question. What are any hot tips you have for us in terms of the filmmakers in the audience and how to manage, other than contacting you directly? And I'll give his email out at the end of this, so that we can, excel in our filmmaking. Those are great points that Fraser mentioned, because I do believe very strongly in general, in terms of your collaborators, the more the collaborator feels like it's their baby, the better, and the less it feels like, this is like the dictatorship of
the director or whatever. Obviously, you want to be a benevolent despot because you're the final decision maker, but at the same time, you want people to feel like it's their baby too, right? So I totally agree with everything that Fraser just said. Another thing I feel like a lot of composers, at least in my experience, I should just talk about my experience, is that, if you're working with a composer on like my previous films, sometimes they might go and work on something for a while, and then they come to you with something that's orchestrated and they've spent a lot of time on, and then you have the uncomfortable position of telling them that it's totally wrong. And it's a terrible conversation because they've sent you this 2-page email with so much poetry about the depth of the musical representation of all the themes you're after, and you're like, oh, this what am I gonna do? This is not right at all. So I think that one of the skills I think is probably really good to develop in the relationship with a composer is to be able to tell from a sketch what a finished product might be and if it's in the right direction. Because a lot of composers that I've worked with in the past, like, they don't like to just present you their piano sketch of the thing, right? They want to actually orchestrate it with the flutes and the clarinet and the violins and the jingles and this, and by the time all of that's in there, they've spent 5 hours on this sketch that's totally wrong, and you're like, you could have spent that 5 hours just improvising on the piano, and I could tell you which part is going in the right direction, right? So I think, if you love a score, listen to the John Williams score of Star Wars on the piano and see if you could imagine, when you're hearing it in the piano, what it could be, when it's fully orchestrated. And if you develop that muscle, I think you save yourself and your composer a lot of grief, at least in my experience. So that's one thing I think is really, really valuable. And there's something else I was thinking, but I can't remember right now. Maybe it'll come back to me.
That's okay. So, yeah, I mean, that's a good point. So trying to find a way to maybe even open up the relationship that you have with your composer and being like, send me garbage and let me listen to it first, and then we can see if we're on the same page.
Totally.
Send me garbage.
Send me garbage that should be on every...
I'm going to get a t-shirt.
Every filmmaker should have that as a motto when they're talking to everybody, including the actors, including any collaborator. You want them to feel safe to send you their garbage and to experiment, because you want them to fail. And the faster you fail, the better. The problem with the thing when the composer goes into their cave and comes back is that they're spending so much effort and they're failing slowly in that way, right? And you're not part of that process. And sometimes a composer can be protective, which I totally understand, because you're like, this is my internal world, this is my process, I don't want to let somebody in on that. So in my experience anyway, I try to make them feel safe, and it's totally okay if it's totally garbage. 90% of what I do is garbage, and then what it ends up is just the best parts that I could piece together, right? So I think making them feel safe to do that, and so that you're part of that process, and then you can say, oh, this is the scent we need to follow here. I think it's a good way. Because another piece of advice, because a lot of composers also don't like temp music. Right? And there's there's YouTube videos about this too. Like, temp love is the bane of movie making and all that kind of stuff, and they're hilarious to watch. And I find a way to go around that, because temp music is useful, obviously, because it allows you to understand a little bit like what's working with your footage. But sometimes as a director, you can get really attached to just one piece of temp music. And you're so attached, you think it's perfect, and I've done this a million times, so I know. And you're like, it cannot be anything but this. And, I will die on this hill. But I think the best thing you can do is to just throw 50 different tracks at the same piece of footage and just see if something else might open up. And the reason why I say this is because, there's a scene in Bibi's Dog is Dead where I was so attached to the Amarcord theme from Fellini's Amarcord by Nino Rota, the score, and I was like, it has to be this. This is it. And then I tried something with a totally different tempo and totally different feeling, but it preserved something about the irreverence and the joy of the Fellini score, but it also worked. And it worked just as well in a different way. And then suddenly I had two different sources to draw from as an inspiration, which opened the possibility of composing an original piece that was neither one or the other. And I think, I don't know if maybe composers not more temp music, Shervin, so some people might not like that, but at least in my experience, it allows you to open up the possibilities of the footage, and I also think the more footage you place against, the more music you place against your movie, even before you talk to a composer, the better you understand your footage. You better understand, like, oh, this is what the movie can be. This is what speaks to, like, brings it to life, and this is what kills it. So when you're talking to the composer, it's you have like a better base to work from, and your reference pool is deeper than just like, this John Williams score has to be the thing that we're going for, and you're just basically, finding a way to rip it off without ripping it off, kind of thing.
Excellent. So send me garbage, big tip, and don't fall in temp love.
Or just have more temp that you...
Or have lots of temp love.
Yeah, or like different temp.
Temp-like.
Yeah.
How's the audience feeling? Anyone have some questions yet, or should I just keep on rambling? I see at least one. Okay, there's a couple of hands, so let's maybe just dive into it. Talk to us about music supervisors and how all that stuff works. Good question.
Yeah, we had a music supervisor on our film. They helped bring in some of their network. I come from the film world, so having a music supervisor also, just opens you up to the music industry here in Toronto or wherever you're getting them from. So that's where their network is based mostly, or throughout Canada. They suggested a composer that they really enjoyed. And so they proposed composers, songwriters to us. And also they helped with contracts and that type of thing that we have no idea about. We considered licensing music for the film, and they gave us an estimate of what that could cost and the timeline. And the timeline is like, you might hear nothing back, or it could take, a few months to, basically it's like, it takes a long time if you want to license music, and it's expensive. So they're great for, being that middle person towards getting licensed music for your film. I think a lot of the creative decisions, I'm not sure how involved the music supervisor is in that regard. Maybe they're all different. Even in terms of like managing the music side of things, I'm not sure how I'm just not sure what falls under the category of music supervisor. But for contracts and licensing and just understanding the music world, they're great for that. And we found our music supervisor just from watching panel discussions of like other film festivals, and they had like a music supervisor panel discussion. And so we found Racket Music, who actually they were actually the music supervisor of last night's opening night film Doubles. So they do a lot of like, they do like film and TV, but they're also down to like support, emerging short films. Just watch panel discussions that speak about music supervision for film, and you'll get a lot more information. Yeah.
And again, now this is the big budget question. If you feel so safe to reveal, sort of, what was your budget and sort of how much went to music? How does that all work? Tell us if you feel comfortable.
No, I'm embarrassed to say our budget. Just because it's like, you spent that much? Like,
it was worth it.
Meaning like you spent that much of your own money. Like that's where I'm more embarrassed. I'm
Fair
like,
enough.
But it was like, it was up there.
How much went to the music?
But to music,
like a percentage wise. Again, this is 100% musical film.
Yeah,
so
probably a quarter to 1/3 maybe went to music, I would say. Maybe no, yeah.
I mean, for a short film, I don't think that's unreasonable.
I'd say like 30-35% maybe went to music, and the music was like very involved, right? 6 original songs.
And how many people? Like
engineers,
multiple people?
Recording artists, sound mixers. It was, and then renting studio space, paying songwriters. So it's a huge part of the film, and it is expensive. And we made sure we paid our composers like industry rates, or what they
as close to as possible.
Yeah.
Shervin, do you want to just discuss your budget?
It was non-existent, so I don't know exactly. I don't actually know what the budget is exactly. It's definitely like $1,000, $2,000.
And then in terms of music, you license some stock music, I assume, for like what?
Well, that's the cost
$200?
of doing everything yourself, by the
Yeah.
way. So you pay for it in time and sweat and tears, many, 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 many tearful nights. Yeah, it's painful. I don't recommend it. Sorry, what was your question?
And then in terms of like the actual like stock music, because there were a couple of pieces that you had to buy. Like what did that set you back?
I think it was about $130. The one this I don't know if I kind of touched on this, but the one thing that's nice about classical music is that you can do so much with it. You can change it. You can you take the beginning of a piece that you like by Chopin, and you add something totally different to it. I mean, Wes Anderson did this with Royal Tenenbaums, where the theme of the movie is actually this cello sonata, but it turns into its own original composition as it goes along, and the composer probably doesn't mind because he's not around. And it's an iconic piece of music that's blending something that exists with something new. So well, if you go that route, obviously what he did is totally different, and it's much more. It totally makes sense why it's so expensive. So didn't cost that much.
Didn't cost that much. All right. Oh, so this is a great question. Could you have gone to SOCAN or another organization in order to help cover the cost of these compositions?
Well, I'm happy to get any input that people have. My philosophy is just go and make it happen, and figure it out as you go along. So yeah, if that's an avenue that's open, that's great to know. I didn't even know that was a possibility.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I don't quite know that was a possibility. I know we had to our supervisor sent our songs or compositions to SOCAN as like part of the contracts, or just creating music. I guess that's part of it. But yeah, that wasn't something we even knew or considered could be a possibility when creating songs. So
I love this question because I know so little about music, and whenever I'm talking to a composer, I'm like, I don't speak your language, so how do I tell you that your song is crap, but like say it in a nice way? So yeah, how do you speak to composers in a way that you can clearly articulate your concerns if maybe you're not musically inclined?
Yeah, it's just being honest with them. Like, this isn't my background, but if you are making a musical, let's say, you have to have some sort of, understanding of music. So you have that in your back pocket. Like, what you're expressing and you know what you want. So yeah, don't be afraid to just start it off with, I know this is your world, but this is what I'm thinking. And especially when it comes to making a film, our opening song is a way to introduce the world. So it was very intentional with how we structured the song. Like, in my mind, I knew musically how it needed to go because there were beats in the film to introduce the film that are setting the journey and the emotion and the pace. And so you have to reiterate, this isn't just like we're not just making a song. This is, especially for this particular song, we're being very deliberate with how and just reiterating. And even if you have to like say, okay, for 8 beats it's this emotion, and then for the next 16 beats it's or bars, it's we need to elevate it because now we've gone from a black screen to just immerse the theater with the music and the beat and the pulse of what the music's going to be. And then the next 16 we dissolve and we're in the clouds. And so from 8 to the beginning of the 16, now it's a transition, and we're still rising to the crescendo of this moment, which is at the end of the 16. But this next 16 here, this is it needs to feel like we're flying through the sky. So it's ethereal and it's light and it's still progressing somewhere. So you just break it down to them why the music needs to be a particular way. And yeah, you're paying, unless it's your friend and they're doing it for free, you're paying them to do this. So they'll understand, like, why you're the filmmaker. Like, you want it to be a particular way so the audience gets the best response. So I would say you can be anal about it. And I know it's the producers probably the composers probably hated me in some regards, because it's like, just let us do the music. But when it comes to a film and, you know, setting a particular pace and tone, because it is being transferred visually, then yeah, you need to just explain that.
So quickly, sort of what was your philosophy on lyrics for this one?
Yeah, again, I approached the songwriting like I would writing a script. So I considered, again, this is music that is going to be in a film. So I was mindful of how the audience is going to take that in. And so I considered character development and themes I wanted to express to the audience, while also considering just the audience experience, right? I wanted to make a joyful and entertaining film, while also, yeah, like I was thinking about the experience of receiving this music. So I wanted to infuse humor into it as well, and think about pacing. Again, we created a film that's a musical journey. So even the structure of all these 6 songs, it follows the progression of music, right? We you know, start with this like joyful, fun, uplifting, you know, a couple songs that just express joy and inspiration and fun, and then we like flip the script with like, you know, this like modern day rap song, and it's like, you know, and then the music, I think it's like the fourth or 5th song, it's like the crescendo of the film, basically. So yeah, I was mindful of who the character archetypes were that we were presenting, and what messages we wanted to present, and also how that fit into the film as a whole. Yeah, and just thinking of the structure of what the film was going to be through all these 6 songs. And again, yeah, I thought of character development and genre and narrative through lyrics.
I don't have any lyrics, so.
No lyrics from Shervin. All right, I'm going to wrap it up and say thank you for coming out today, and I'd like to thank our panelists for coming out today.
Thank you, Fraser, Shervin, and Richard for those toe-tapping tips we heard today. This chat was produced by Jen Pogue, Ashley Rains, and Bern Euler for the Canadian Film Fest. Music by Brett Higgins. The Cheers and Chats podcast is co-produced, edited, and sound mixed by Ryan Gordon. For more info on the fun happening now at CFF, find us at CanadianFilmFest.ca.